Good afternoon to those of you on the East Coast. Good morning to those on the West Coast, the Central Time Zone. Those following from Israel, from Europe, from other parts abroad, a good evening. Today, we are experiencing one of the most historical days, not only in Jewish history, but in world history. Not that this war is over, not that there aren't still goals to achieve, but today humanity is safer. Today, humanity is in a different place than it was yesterday. And for 40 years, the Shia regime, the Shia hegemonic caliphate based in Tehran, that has tried to build its ring of fire to bring about the annihilation of Israel, to bring about the annihilation, ultimately, of Sunni Islam, and to bring about the annihilation of Christianity and Western civilization. That regime's 40-year trillion-dollar investment has been destroyed, has been eliminated. It doesn't mean this story is over, and it doesn't mean there won't be weeks of war to come. But we today are living in a different universe. We today are living in a different world. And history will remember this date. History will remember what happened, because humanity can survive, the Jewish people can survive, Israel can survive, as a function and as a consequence of what Israel started 10 days ago and what America joined in over the course of the last 12 hours. And to give us a perspective, to give us a context, to give us an analysis is our good friend, Dr. Jonathan Schanzer. Many of you ask all the time to hear Jonathan, to hear his analysis, his context, and he's back. He himself was in Israel the last time that he briefed us. He had a very challenging experience going through Jordan, taking a series of journalists that FDD took to Israel, bringing them back to the States. But he's here with us to give us his perspective, his analysis. And Jonathan, we can't thank you enough that you always make time for us. You educate us. You give us a context. And we're very, very excited to hear what you have to say in your perspective.
Well, thank you, Steve. It's great to be back. Definitely took a couple days to get catch up on sleep a little bit. And let me just say that my thoughts are with the people of Israel right now. What they have been going through, the lack of sleep, the stress, the challenges, the danger, the destruction, it is harrowing. And I don't think that the pictures that we see paint a clear enough picture for all of us. I mean, I don't think that people understand just the level of stress that Israelis are going through as this war has ground on. But to your point, Steve, this is a remarkable moment in history. And again, not just Jewish history or Israeli history, world history. I do believe that the arc of history has been bent in a different direction after last night. Of course, Donald Trump ordering massive strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities. There were 3 of them that were hit. The U.S. sent B-2 bombers equipped with massive ordnance penetrators. They hit the Fordow facility. We're getting a sense right now. I'll just give you they hit Isfahan, they hit Fordow, and they hit Natanz. These are the big 3. Fordow was the big one, right? Because that's the one that was embedded deep inside of a mountain with reinforced concrete. And only the U.S. could knock these out with B-2 bombers. And that's exactly what they apparently did. We saw the BDA, the battle damage assessment, or at least the first one of, I think, what will be several, with Pete Hegseth and some of his generals at the Pentagon, 8 a.m. Eastern today, talking about what ended up, it's really remarkable, the entire operation. I mean, forgetting about how long it took for the planes to get over Iran, the entire bombing took 25 minutes. And what we're hearing from J.D. Vance, what we're hearing from Pete Hegseth, is that the Iranian nuclear program is effectively destroyed. Now, it doesn't mean that it's entirely destroyed. There still could be pieces of this program that still need to be dealt with. Fordow, I think we still don't have a complete sense of whether the entire facility imploded from when the MOP reached its destination, some 75 or 100 meters below ground. So I think we're still waiting to hear a little bit more about that. At Isfahan, I think there are still some questions about the enriched uranium that was there in these tunnels, whether they're now just entombed and no one's going to be able to get to them because of the destruction wrought by U.S. munitions. And then there's also at Natanz, there is this new facility that they were creating, Salahin as it's called, and that's 100 meters below ground. Unclear whether that thing has been destroyed. I think there's still a couple of outstanding questions, but look, by and large, historic night. Donald Trump did what I don't think anybody had expected him to do. Everybody was still wondering whether he was more isolationist in nature. He has, I think, surprised a lot of his critics. He has surprised the Iranians. He went ahead and pulled the trigger. And this, of course, is after the Israelis have done the vast majority of the hard work. 75% of that Iranian nuclear program was destroyed by the Israelis before the United States got there, and the U.S. was just able to bat clean up here. And I will say that there are a couple of things that we need to watch as we broaden the aperture. Forget just for a minute about the nuclear program. I think it's going to be decades before anyone in Iran is able to really seriously consider a nuclear program anew. That just does not seem likely to me right now, and I do think that history is already on a better trajectory, as I mentioned. I think the question now is, what does the regime do? And I want to just take a few minutes to look at our options here and really, it's not our options, it's the regime. They can do a couple of things. One is they can capitulate. And I don't know what the chances of that are. Right now, when you look at the rhetoric of this regime as of mid-morning, early afternoon here on the East Coast on Sunday, we're not looking at a regime that is signaling capitulation. They're talking about cutting off the Strait of Hormuz. They're talking about targeting Americans. They have already fired additional ballistic missiles at Israel. This is a regime that appears defiant. And I think we need to be aware of the fact that they may be willing to fight to the end. And that would not be inconsistent with an apocalyptic Shiite regime that sees itself in an existential struggle with the United States and Israel. Capitulating to the great Satan and the little Satan would be uncharacteristic of this regime from an ideological perspective. Now, there's the other part of this, which is, okay, so what does that mean? I think there are a couple things that I'm watching for. One is the potential for Iran to try to ensnare Israel into a war of attrition. The idea being that they just launch salvo after salvo at Israel and try to grind down those air defenses, because there is a finite number of arrow interceptors, which we've talked about before on this program, Steve. Those arrow interceptors that knock out ballistic missiles, they don't grow on trees. They cost $3 to $5 million a pop to produce, and the Israelis have been using them at an alarmingly high rate. And the regime knows this. And I think they're trying to exploit this. Now, it's not like this is the only timeline. The other timeline is, what can the Israelis do to erode Iran's capabilities and to minimize the damage that can be wrought by these ballistic missiles? And there, as I understand it, the regime started with roughly 2,000 ballistic missiles. Right now, it's probably somewhere around 1,400, maybe even a little less. And then there's also the launchers themselves, which is how you get a ballistic missile off the ground. There, the Israelis have done excellent work as well. They've reduced those by half, so maybe there were 600. And I'm using really back-of-the-envelope numbers because I don't have them. But if they were about 600, maybe they're down to 300 now, which means you cannot have as large of a salvo as maybe you had before. And so there's some good news to point to there, but I do think that Israel is not out of the woods. Then I think there's the other question, which is, does the regime begin to attack the United States? When they talk about closing the Strait of Hormuz, I mean, it's kind of ironic, but that hurts China more than it hurts the United States in terms of where China gets its oil. But it will have an impact on oil prices, and that could put political pressure on Donald Trump to try to end this war in some other way. There's also the fear that some of our allies in the region may be struck by the Iranians with short or mid-range weapons. I'm talking about Saudi Arabia and their oil infrastructure. I'm talking about the United Arab Emirates and their infrastructure. the Bahrainis and the bases that we have there, maybe even the Qataris, even though the Qataris have been essentially fronting for the Iranian regime from the beginning. They're a malign actor unto themselves. But there is that concern. There's the concern of lone wolf or sleeper cell attacks here in the United States against American targets. And I am concerned about that as well. And then again, then there's the that broader threat of a war of attrition against Israel. So there are options that the regime has. I will say that attacking the United States or closing off shipping seems suicidal, given the threats that Donald Trump issued to the Islamic Republic as he announced those attacks last night. When those attacks were complete, when those 25 minutes were over, and the B-2s were flying safely home, that's when Donald Trump said, "Don't test us. Don't even try it." Does the regime try it? And then what does that mean? I will tell you this. There are a lot of people out there, Steve, who are warning that we're going to get drawn into the Middle East again, that we're going to get stuck in the quicksand of the Middle East, and that we won't be able to get out, and we're going to lose blood and treasure, and we're going to divert our gaze from the real threat, which is, of course, the Chinese Communist Party. It is not a foregone conclusion that we do this. I think the key is that we don't overreact, that we neutralize threats if they present themselves. We neutralize the regime in ways that are consistent with our policy, which is not putting boots on the ground, not nation building, not trying to turn Iran into some sort of Jeffersonian democracy. This was the folly of the Bush years. I think we can all look back in retrospect and say, those were probably not the best policies. We can do this without making significant investments. Now, the last thing that I'll just mention in terms of the analysis that I've been hearing out of Israel is that there is a third way, maybe even a fourth way. And these are the sort of black swan options, I think, of what may be in front of us. One is that somebody inside the regime says, that's enough. I didn't sign up for this. And I want Ali Khamenei out. And I want this regime done. And that these people, whoever's behind this, may not be like a saint, may not be a Democrat, may not be someone who respects the rights of the Iranian people or even respects the United States or Israel, but that they understand that this is survival and that you could see some kind of insurrection from within. You could also, by the way, see the Iranian people rising up, which, we'd obviously welcome. It would be chaotic. But certainly something that I think we would welcome nonetheless, because we believe that the Iranian people are more pro-West than most people realize. And then there's the last of the options, the sort of black swan options, and that is that the regime stops firing. Its nuclear program is defanged, its proxies are defanged, and they just stop fighting. Because that's what's happened in Lebanon, for example, with Hezbollah. They didn't surrender. They just stopped fighting because they realized that it was futile. And that may be what the regime ultimately understands, maybe thinking that it'll go on to live and fight another day. I am not sure that the Israelis let them just walk away unscathed. I do think that the Israelis are thinking that this regime needs to be ended. But I also know that there's no rush at this point, given that the Iranian nuclear program seems to be a shell of what it once was, if it even exists at all. So Donald Trump has done an amazing thing last night. He will go down in Jewish history and Israeli history as a hero. There's no question about it. And I think that, historians will debate whether Donald Trump made the right move, but we'll learn in the days and weeks and perhaps months to come whether there was any blowback for the United States. We'll find out whether those who were saying and warning that this was going to be catastrophic and it would lead to World War III, we'll find out if, they were maybe blowing things a little bit out of proportion or if they're real concerns. But regardless, this has been an historic night, unlike anything that I dreamt that I would see in my lifetime. As someone who's been studying the Middle East now for more than 3 decades, this was a night I will never, ever forget.
The same critics of Donald Trump who said that there was going to be a third world war in the Middle East if America moved its embassy to Jerusalem and declared Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. you know, Donald Trump's critics have as much bluster and are as much, how should I say this? They're as gregarious as some of his supporters.
Look, let me just say, Steve, I'm not here to tell you that there will be no response. It's quite possible that Americans can lose their lives as a result of this. It's possible that we could see terrorist attacks in the United States. I don't know how to put a percentage on this because, quite frankly, I'm not seeing the intel. I mean, the FBI, I'm sure, is tracking sleeper cells and possible lone wolves, and they're looking at this. My hope is that they were prepared for this moment. Donald Trump waited a few days before he struck, probably to give them some time to track down the most likely threats. I do think that it's still possible that some of our Gulf allies are hit. These things are possible. But that doesn't mean that we're necessarily on the path to World War III. It doesn't mean that the world is less safe as a result of what Donald Trump has ordered, what he has done. I actually believe that the world is fundamentally more safe as a result of this because now the world's most prolific state sponsor of terrorism is unable to acquire a nuclear weapon through its enrichment program. By the way, we still could see the Iranians trying to acquire a weapon on the black market, so to speak, right, from the Pakistanis or from the North Koreans or even from the Russians or the Chinese. But at least for now, the efforts that we saw underway to make a bomb on the part of the Iranian regime, that is no longer. And we're hearing that from J.D. Vance. We're hearing it from Pete Hegseth. We're hearing it from Donald Trump. That was the goal. The goal was to end Iran's quest for a nuclear weapon through all the channels that we were watching.
Question in terms of the Basij, we'll call them the Iranian Gestapo, meaning the regime's internal police, the ones that have gunned down and slaughtered people in the streets in 2022, the students, they go after the women who uncover their hair. And we hear that there's as many as 200,000 of them, maybe more even, that are armed, have no qualms killing their own, killing their neighbors, killing their relatives, going after Kurds, going after Yazidis. So as long as they control things internally, you don't see large numbers going into the streets and revolting. Is it possible that part of this campaign, I'm talking about the Air Force campaign coming from Israel, not only targets the nuclear scientists, not only targets IRGC leadership, but possibly targets some of the Basij, which takes, so to speak, the handcuffs off of the population, liberates the population from this internal terrorist Gestapo that the regime has held over its head for the last 30-some years?
You're asking an excellent question. Until now, I think the Israelis have made the Iranian nuclear program their top priority in terms of those F-35 strikes, as they've achieved total air superiority in Iran, which, I mean, let's just acknowledge here, in case we've not said it enough, the air superiority that they've achieved is unbelievable. I mean, when the foreign minister of Iran wants to go to Geneva for talks, he literally has to figure out whether he can get out of Israeli airspace in Iran, right? I mean, this is where we are in this moment. They do not control the skies over Iran. And so now I think the Israelis have this option in front of them with the nuclear program destroyed, or at least apparently destroyed. They have to start making decisions. Do they go and hunt for these ballistic missiles to destroy as many of those as possible and to destroy the launchers, as many of those as possible, to cut down on the ability of the regime to do damage to Israel? Because these missiles are still falling, Steve. You and I have seen these pictures, and they are horrific. What the Home Front Command, what Pikuda Orif in Israel is, what they're dealing with right now, it is horrific, right? Massive destructive scenes that they are trying to clean up and to keep Israelis safe. So they can try to remove the threat of ballistic missiles and those launchers, or they can start trying to target Basij and some of the other institutions of repression inside Iran that might encourage the people to come out and rise up. So those are the choices on the Israeli side. But then I think, let's just take a look at what's going on the Iranian side for a minute. I think we need to acknowledge that the U.S. record of supporting the Iranian people has been terrible. That we have successively thrown the people of Iran under the bus, as they say. That we have not supported them as they've risen up against the regime. We've not called for an end to the regime. We've not called for the empowerment of the people. We've not given them the weapons or the cash or the intelligence, all the things that they would need for regime change. And we've not done this because we're afraid of regime change. That we believe that after the failed experiments in Iraq and Afghanistan, that we should not be in the business of regime change from the US perspective. And I think that the Israelis are still toying with it. They don't have the same baggage that we do. They're not worried about what happened in Iraq or Afghanistan. They just know that this regime, this is the devil we know, and it's the devil that needs to go. Right? I mean, there are those who say, look, better to have a regime that you know how to predict. I got to say, I can predict what this regime will do. It will keep working to destroy the Jewish state. It will continue to work to undermine and attack the United States and American interests. And it's for that reason that I think the Israelis are likely. I don't know if they do it right now. I think they try to end the rocket threat, the missile threat. I think they try to remove as much of that infrastructure that can do damage to Israel. And that's the race against time that they have for the moment. But their air superiority isn't going anywhere. And they will have the ability in another week or 2 weeks to then start targeting the besieged. And by then, I think the regime will already be well on its way to unraveling if it isn't already.
So you see that there could be fissures, there could be fractures in the regime already. You're seeing it.
Oh yeah, I mean, and I think you already have rivalries that exist within the the various services. You have the traditional armed forces. You've got the IRGC. You've got the MOIS. You've got the Besiege. You've got all of these different factions that don't necessarily. Look, the Islamic Republic is a government that is built on paranoia and fear. And they are not immune to that paranoia and fear amongst each other. They're not just paranoid about Israel or the United States. They all distrust one another. And so those fissures can be exacerbated, I think, with a little bit of help maybe from the United States or other allied countries or Israel. Some information operations, I think we're long overdue. I think we've been fearful of engaging. I think now is the right time. And we're watching, by the way, also that the Israelis, they're shutting down, the internet intermittently, and they're shutting down the, Tehran Stock Exchange and the central bank. I mean, all of these things are creating more and more chaos on the ground, and I think that can be exacerbated. And then I think, airstrikes by the Israelis on key targets can also exacerbate it. So I think the regime's already fraying. We can see it. We know it. It's not hard to understand why, when the Israelis have that total air superiority, it does give one a sense that the regime was falling apart. Now you have these massive ordnance penetrators falling on key targets that were once seen as the crown jewels of the regime. And, just to broaden it out just even a bit more, Steve, we always talk about how the Iranians play chess, right? And how they look at everything like a chessboard, or at least some of their strategists will. And I think we can acknowledge something that when you look at their chessboard right now, they've lost Hezbollah, they've lost Hamas, the Houthis don't seem to be firing, they lost the Syrian regime. When you look at all these tools that they had, all of their proxies, these are chess pieces that are no longer on the board. And what they always had was they had their queen, and the queen was their nuclear program. And now the queen has been knocked off the board. So the question is, what do they have left to fight with? And I think that's what we're struggling to understand right now. Are they pawns here in the United States? Is it just missiles? If so, I think, we could be watching an endgame. But right now, all eyes on the regime to see how they respond to what was a catastrophic moment for the Islamic Republic.
Just for the sake of clarification, the IRGC, the Iranian army, the Basij, what is the MOIS, if you can explain that to us?
These are the intelligence services, and right, and they're part of this too, and they've taken their own beating. And by the way, you got the Iranian nuclear agency destroyed. You've got the headquarters of the armed forces destroyed. The edifices of the regime, the core kind of pillars of the bureaucracy that has enforced this republic of fear, they are now being dismantled. The question again, though, becomes from the Israeli perspective, what is more expedient? Do you want to hit more and more of these the pieces of this bureaucracy in an attempt to get the regime to soften in more places and collapse? I think there's an inexact science there, and I don't know who knows how to do this, right? Like you hit enough of these things and the whole place implodes. Or do you just keep taking out as many missiles and as many launchers as you can to try to protect as many Israeli lives? This is the kind of stuff that only the Mossad and Amman, military intelligence in Israel, and maybe Unit 8200, the cyber agency, they're trying to pick up on all of this, I think, right now to get a sense of what comes next. What is the right strategy for Israel? I think we can probably say right now with some certainty that the US doesn't want to do any more, right? Donald Trump said, we sent them home, we're done, we hit what we needed to hit, we made sure that Iran wasn't going to go nuclear, don't test us. And that was essentially what the man said last night to the regime. We'll find out if they test him, but I think there is no interest on the part of the United States in returning. Now, Steve, there is one more thing that I neglected to mention. And when you look around at the Seven Front War that Israel has been fighting, you now see that the Iranian regime, the head of the octopus, is neutralized, stunned. Maybe not completely destroyed, but absolutely stunned and just unable to function. We'll see what they do next, and maybe they act out of desperation. Maybe they actually fight to the death. We'll see where they go, but this is, we're not looking at a regime that's long for this world. Hezbollah said they're not interested. The Houthis have gone quiet. Iraq's been quiet. Syria, again, not a thing. West Bank, even Judea and Samaria has been, quiet throughout all of this. Look around. It does draw your attention back to one theater, and that's the theater where it all began. You probably have seen today that Israel has pulled out 3 more bodies, and now there are 50 left. Roughly 20 of them, maybe a few, maybe, I don't know, 19, 18 are still alive. I have to ask right now whether what happened last night in Iran, whether that has an impact on Hamas's willingness to continue to fight. This is an important moment, not just for the big showdown between Israel and Iran and whether Iran capitulates, but also a question of, setting things right in Israel, getting these hostages back, and maybe finally bringing this thing to a conclusion and trying to put a bookend to what began on October 7th of 2023. It's early days. I don't know if we can answer these questions just yet, but I do have to ask whether Hamas thinks that it still has the wherewithal to fight now that the regime in Iran has been absolutely shamed on the world stage. This does not look like an all-powerful regional actor. This looks like a spent force, and I think that is not lost on Hamas right now.
2 questions, and it goes back to 2 things that you said. You mentioned, what about the Sunni Arab nations in the Gulf who have significant assets? The Saudi Arabian oil fields with Mecca and Medina as the holy cities, the UAE, both clear enemies of Iran. They've only been dealing with Iran because they saw American capitulation and American weakness. That's changed under President Trump. In fact, last night the Saudis came out and attacked the strike, attacked Israel. They had all kinds of statements, which again, they're trying to protect their interests. No one was more happy about last night than the Saudi Arabians, but they needed to make the statements because they don't want Iran shooting ballistic missiles at them. So you have that factor. The other factor that really scares me, and I don't have up-to-date information, but we heard from Homeland Security they're tracking at least 150 Islamic sleeper cells in the United States alone, not to mention all the Islamic sleeper cells in Europe that could attack American assets, Jewish assets there. The war of, so to speak, the sleeper cells, the war of the long tentacles of the Iranian octopus that exists on every continent. It exists in South America, North America, Europe, Australia. That could do some very, very significant damage. And if there's no regime left, then these sleeper cells don't get paid anymore. They don't have a job anymore. It's a different story. As long as there's an official regime, then they have an incentive to defend that regime, so to speak, or to act on behalf of that regime. What's your take there? And again, it's a very speculative type of question that I'm asking you. But what are your concerns? What are your thoughts there?
Look, I haven't been in government in a very long time. I can tell you that when I was in government, I was aware that there were concerns about sleeper cells. I mean, this is 20 years ago. People were concerned about sleeper cells. I have to imagine that those concerns have not abated. I do know that as Donald Trump warned that he might attack Iran over the course of 2 weeks, and he did that, I don't know, whatever it was, 3 or 4 days ago, that at least my assumption was that he was trying to get a sense at home from the Department of Homeland Security, from the FBI, of what the threat environment looked like here. I would be shocked if there weren't arrests, if there were roundups of people suspected to be part of Iranian sleeper cells. But, look, it's not just, and we've seen this in Europe and other places, they've been recruiting kids. They've been recruiting like 16, 15, 14-year-old kids to attack the Israeli embassy, for example. And so we need to be cognizant of the fact that there is a threat. And in some cases, we may see that the threat continues even if the regime collapses, because ideology will live on past the regime. And these people are not fighting for money, right? These are not mercenaries. These are true believers in many cases. And the regime has indoctrinated untold numbers, and got them thinking about how the United States and Israel are their top enemies and that they need to be destroyed. So we could be dealing with an ideology that outlasts this regime. I do see the regime as very likely, beginning to lose steam here, but that doesn't mean that the movement, what we call the Islamic Revolution of Iran, it could live on. And that does worry me. And of course, all of this is speculative, but it does concern me that that may be what lies ahead. And these are the moments, by the way, that, when we try to analyze what's going on, it's important to try to think through worst case scenarios, not because we're trying to scare ourselves here, but to be able to prepare for what may come next. It has been chaotic in the United States because you have pro-Hamas people out on the streets and on college campuses and engaging in all manner of violence and destruction of property and intimidation and hate speech. That's where we've been. Now, does that compound with true believers of the Iranian cause, the Islamic Republic, the Islamic Revolution? I think that's a question. I'm concerned about attacks, as you mentioned, against some of the neighboring countries, oil infrastructure, American interests abroad. These are all things that we have to watch for. But I think, to your earlier point about, World War III not breaking out when the United States recognized the embassy in Jerusalem, World War III not breaking out when the United States killed Qasem Soleimani, the chief terrorist belonging to the IRGC leadership. He was killed in 2020 by Donald Trump. And after an initial small reaction, we saw nothing. I'm not telling you that we're going to see nothing here, but I'm just saying, I don't know if we need to be, the sky's not falling. I think we need to be aware that there are real threats out there, and we need to watch for them very carefully. We need to be prepared. And I'm hopeful that the United States government, the Israeli government, Western governments around the world are preparing for this. They're watching the right people, maybe listening, trying to get an understanding of how they're communicating. That would be a very good development indeed. Thwarting that, preventing the Islamic Republic from being able to exact revenge after what happened last night would be an astounding achievement as well.
Jonathan, as we look forward to next steps, any last thoughts? Anything that you would recommend that we are diligent about, that we look into, or that we can anticipate? Be it Iranian actions, we've already discussed Iranian actions in the Straits of Hormuz towards Israel. We've discussed some of the Sunni Arab nations. Any thoughts? Any final thoughts?
Right now, I'll just say I'm watching what is happening in Israel primarily. I was there, and last week, and I experienced, and it's only been a fraction of what the Israelis have now experienced. They've had many more days of bombardments, and I'm concerned about the well-being of the 10 million citizens. I do know that what I've heard from Israelis is that the figures of death and injuries and destruction are better than some of the scenarios that they had expected when this war began, that they had feared much worse. I think it's possible that things get worse before they get better. But I do believe that right now that Israel has done the right thing. The United States has done the right thing. This had to happen, or the Iranians were going to break out and acquire that nuclear weapon, and then that would have tied the hands of everyone. So there will be, I think, tough days ahead in terms of bombardments, in terms of the kind of damage that Israel may continue to absorb. But I will say that these F-35 sorties that the Israelis continue to fly into Iran as they dominate Iranian airspace. This is crucial right now that Israel neutralize as many of these threats as possible. It would be wonderful if other countries can help in support of that. But I understand this is Israel's battle, and Israel is doing unbelievable work right now in removing these threats, but they're not done.
Jonathan, thank you. To those participating, unlike last week where we had a daily briefing, we believe at this point we're going to be having every other day. We'll be having a briefing on Tuesday and on Thursday. And we'd like your help and we'd like your support. The Army's asked us not only to support the reservists in the Army, the reservists in the Air Force, the funding for the equipment, the emergency medical equipment, the emergency extraction equipment that is used by Picud Arif, the Home Front Command. Right now, the Home Front Command is the one that's overseeing the destruction and overseeing the rescue, overseeing the transfer of people into hospitals because roads are hit, infrastructure's been hit. It's not a simple time as Jonathan described in Israel. And we've literally had millions and millions of dollars each day in terms of requests. And this is something we're trying to fulfill. If you're capable, if you have the means, please help us. This is a war. This is a crisis on the homeland. And our job, we're being tasked to fund the needs of the soldiers. And that is FIDF.org. FIDF.org. We're very, very grateful to you. The world is a better place today. The world is a safer place today. This is not over. It's far from over. But we have seen in the course of the last 10 days, literally biblical, historical, miraculous events happening. And we want to thank Jonathan because he's been the one who's guided us, as well as General Padan, as well as Mark Dubovitz and others. He's guided us through these very, very choppy waters, but yet these very historic waters that we're experiencing. Jonathan, thank you, and we'll be back in touch.
Thanks, Steve.